Hello there, my name's Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Joining me today is my good buddy Mike, calling in from New York. And today we are going to talk about one of our most favorite and special comfort bands, Rush. But first, I thought we would just start kind of giving everybody a feel. Just talk about our relationship with Rush. How did we discover them? Why are they so important to us? And I'll let you go first, Mike.
Sure. So Rush has been a band that I've been a fan of for a very long time. I first heard Rush, I think, when I was in maybe the 7th grade or 9th grade. It's hard to remember truthfully, but my two uncles got me into Rush. My first albums, I believe, were 2112 and Moving Pictures. And then, it was almost love at first listen, really. I love Rush. And in high school, they were my favorite band. I still always liked them, but I kind of listened to them less because I was discovering other things. But now, the older I get, the more I appreciate just how amazing this band is.
Yeah.
And what a really special and consistently great discography that they put out. They always stay true to their artistic merit, and they always have a deep impact with me personally because the music and lyrics are just so good and so meaningful.
Yeah, I agree. I can't remember the first time I heard them, but it seems like it was around the time of the 1997 Masters when that program came out. So I was very young. I won't tell you how young I was because I don't want to date myself here. But my dad was a huge Rush fan, and when he would buy the 1997 remasters, he would always give me the original copies, the original Mercury label copies. And so I was introduced to Rush through that. I totally agree with you. There's not another story quite like theirs. This is two guys who were best friends. Maybe they were kind of outcasts in the little town that they grew up, Willowdale, as features in some of the early mythology too. But they were basically just two buddies, and by chance they hooked up with this amazing drummer who at the time was working a parts counter at his dad's hardware store. But he had these big dreams, and, he packed up his cases and, went to go audition, and, that was it. They maintained those three personalities over 40 years of different stylistic changes. And the way that they were able to pull that off, I think is, and we'll get more into that as we start talking about each individual album. But I think that they stayed true to the core trio and they stayed true to themselves. But they brought in production team to make, that was always the way in which they grew, is that they would always work with different people. And then, there's also that, and I know I'm rambling a little bit, but there's also the remarkable thing that they used the same cover designer from 1975 on.
It's amazing.
And that in itself, if you just look at the album covers next to each other, they're as diverse looking at the cover arts as they are listening to them. And the fact that this is just one guy's artistic vision, on the covers, as well as the three of them in the music, I think is something that makes this a very cohesive catalog. And by the way, very difficult to rank.
Yes, extremely difficult to rank.
The quality is just kind of consistent. And, there's obviously there's a couple that I knew were going to be at the bottom. And I knew there was going to be some at the top, but it was everything in between that was kind of hard to lock down on, because it's well, what am I in the mood for today? How can I compare, say, the self-titled Rush album to Grace Under Pressure? You can't.
It's so different. Yeah.
They're so different. Yeah, there's no comparison. But I think I'm going to let you get started with your ranking. So the way that we're going to handle this ranking is a little bit different than what we've done before. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to go with Mike's ranking. And I have my own, and we're going to kind of compare it to my thoughts, and we're going to discuss it. But I'll let you get started. So there's 19 albums, right? 19?
Yes, 19 studio albums. We're doing the studio albums.
And that's also important to note, is that we won't be doing any of the live records, even though they're fantastic. That might be a video of its own at some point, say if this does well. And the only way to really show your support and encourage us to do more of this sort of thing is to comment on the video, to like it, and especially subscribe to the channel, because the analytics matter. But yeah, we will not be talking about the EP
feedback, yeah,
because it's not a studio album, and it's not Rush music. So it was kind of hard to
it's almost like a tribute album in a way.
Right, kind of to their very early roots.
Yeah, and all the live stuff is different too. And there's a lot of live albums. But if you want to hear us rank those, let us know in the comments.
Yes. Well, so we're going to start at number 19. You want to tell us what your least favorite Rush record is?
Yeah. So my number 9. So I surprised myself. My number 19. When we started this, I thought it was going to be one album, but it actually changed. And my number 19 is Vapor Trails. That is my number 19. It's from 2002, right? This is the year it came out. Yeah. This is one that I haven't heard in quite a while. It's got an original version and it's got a remix. Ian is showing both of them. I only have the original on disc, but the remix, I've heard on streaming a few times too. This is the darkest period personally for the band. Unfortunately, it kind of shows in the music.
Yeah.
I know. So this is a very interesting album in a lot of ways.
Do you want to talk briefly about why it's so dark?
Sure. You could probably elaborate more on why it's so dark, but so after the previous album before this is Test for Echo, and afterwards Neil had lost both his wife and his daughter
within 10 months of each other.
Within 10 months, yeah, and that awful shock caused the band to go on hiatus. And they were, essentially like Neil said that he was done after that happened. It was like Rush was dead
for 5 years.
A couple of years. Yeah, 5 years they were dead.
And he took his BMW across the countryside. I need to read his Ghost Rider book.
So do
but I think a lot of that was like travels through North America.
Yep.
And kind of, it's sort of like the whole idea of I've never had children or anything, or even younger brothers and sisters, but you always talk about how movement cures. It's like it cures your baby soul.
Yes.
And that's what he did. He took a movement treatment, basically. That was his therapy. And there are songs, on this record that directly deal with that. And the most obvious one being Ghost Rider.
Yeah.
Which is actually directly about that trauma, but also like The Stars Look Down. That's Neil looking up at the stars, at the starry sky, and saying, "Why me? Why did this have to happen to me?" And the stars look back at him and say, "Figure it out. You got to figure that out." So there's lots of really great ideas on this album, and for me, it's not my least favorite. It's my second to least favorite, and I for one thing, I think it's proof that, the whole idea that an artist has to be in pain to create great art is not true. That number one, that's it's kind of evidence against that misconception. But that's also not the major problem I have with it. There's like an off vibe to it. A lot of Rush music to me is joyous. It's happy. It lifts me up. And there's something about this one that just feels a little bit off. And in the when they made it, they were getting into their heads a little too much, I think, thinking that we've lost the spark. We need to regain this because we haven't been playing together in 5 years. I think that a little bit of that ended up hurting the record because they were recording a lot of their demos and being like, well, that's the effect that we want. That's the sound we want. And they were kind of afraid that if they went and belabored it too much, that they would lose some of that energy, which is understandable. But the result of that was that the recordings themselves had gain distortion problems that got even worse when they went to master the record, simply because at this time, 2002, loudness was king. And everybody was trying to out loud each other with their mastering. And so I think the combination of the demo recordings not being so great with the poor mastering of the time, as well as the external problems within the band, I think it makes it. It's not my least favorite Rush record because I like the songs on it. A couple of the songs, like One Little Victory, is a great tune.
Yeah, that opening riff is pretty powerful with the double bass drum kicking in. Mm-hmm. That's like, them saying, "We're back."
We're back.
It's
right.
Great. Yeah.
And when they came back with Snakes and Arrows 5 years later, to me, they were really back.
Yeah.
Like that is the really, really back album. But Peaceable Kingdom, which is a song that frankly deals with 9/11. And the fallout of 9/11 is one of my favorite songs on the album. So is Ghost Rider, which I mentioned. I think that's a fantastic song.
Too. That really surprised me on this listen. That song is terrific.
Yes, and Secret Touch.
Yeah, Secret Touch is a good one. That's Geddy's favorite too, I think. Yeah, that's a good one. I also really liked Ceiling Unlimited. That might be actually for me the best song on here. Freeze is also really good. I was really surprised by that song too. Like Freeze sounds like nothing else in the Rush catalog. Like it's just really heavy.
It is.
It does. So there's some really cool like guitar and bass effects that Geddy and Alex were doing in the back half. It sound really cool.
Well, there was this edict that came down from Alex Lifeson, and I don't think we mentioned the members of the band.
We didn't do that, did we?
Of course, the members of Rush, which remain consistent with the exception of the first album, drummer John Ruzzi, Geddy Lee, vocals, bass pedals, keyboards, and he writes the songs with Alex Lifeson, guitarist, and of course the professor on drums, Neil Peart, who's the band's lyricist. And a lot of their lyrics were a result of Neil would put these long lyrics together and Geddy would kind of edit them and make them into something that he was comfortable singing. And like, for instance, on this album, he felt uncomfortable with a lot of the personal stuff, which makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that Geddy did was he would change, like if a song had I feel this way, I did this, I took the ride. He would change it to you feel this way, you took the ride, you experienced this, to make it more universal. And that's something that, is important to mention that he did on all of the songs. Like he tried to make them more accessible to him and others. But this album also has 70-minute album-itis to me. Like it's just long, and especially the production on it makes it painful. Which is an awful thing to say, that it actually causes me pain to listen to it. And, you would think, well, hey, there is a remix and it came out in 2013. That fixes all the problems, right? No. I have to say that the remix is probably the reason why this album isn't my least favorite, because it does uncover the songs.
Yeah, it helps a lot. I think the main problem is like still the drums don't have any heft at all. They're just like paper. And like, you still get the problem with the guitar sounds because of, like you said before, the demos, all of the guitars to me sound like mud. And like everything, because of that, and because of the massive length of this album, everything just kind of starts to sound the same or feel the same for me.
Yeah. Like
half the record goes in this ear and goes right out. And it's a shame because there's some really, interesting things going on. But it's all buried under this, mud.
And part of that is, their working methods at the time. They weren't getting together and writing together like they had in the early days. And also, they would let Alex stay up all night and smoking weed and just putting just tons and tons of overdubs on the songs.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah. And some of that, like, I think it's a wonderful idea. Like Alex is having fun and, playing stuff all night, being creative. But I think that somebody should have stepped in and been the producer, because they did produce this themselves, but somebody should have been the producer and said, hey, let's pull back some of those layers, maybe do a little less of that. And talking about the thin drum sound on the remix, I kind of wish that the remix would split the difference, because it's almost too clean, to the point where the drums to me sound like they're programmed. And for somebody like Neil Peart, like, that is the wrong direction, in my opinion. And I would have liked to have seen something that was a little bit heavier in the drums. Like the original mix is like overpoweringly heavy in the drums, and more presence of the guitars. And I think I would have liked this remix a lot better. As it stands, yeah, it's very near the bottom of my list as well. It's actually my second least favorite.
I don't want to keep like dunking on it, because like there's a few like songs I really like we mentioned Ghost Rider. I really like The Stars Look Down. Also, Earthshine has some good moments. I also think almost all of the material that they played live elevates every single song.
Yeah,
on here,
sure.
this stuff smoked live.
Yep.
The two things that I like the most about this record are Neil's drum parts. Like, yeah, the drums kind of sound bad on this album, but the playing is really awesome and inventive. Neil's parts are sick on here. It's also like a reinvention of himself, really. Like, he's come back from all of this hurt and all this pain, and he's playing amazing, arguably better than he's played before. And because everything moving forward too, you can argue the parts are just so creative and so inventive. And the other thing is Geddy's singing. Geddy's voice sounds awesome.
Oh, yeah.
He sings the heck out of this stuff. My number 18 was the debut album, Rush.
Who?
Who? Yeah. The first album with the big R. I don't own this one. There's two Rush albums I don't own, and this is one of them. For whatever reason, I never got it. But there it is. The bright pink font.
That's not what I wanted. I wanted that.
Yeah. And this one is the only Rush album without Neil Peart. It's with their original drummer, John Rutsey. Yeah,
so why is this not your least favorite? Why is it your
this one was the one I thought was going to be on the bottom before we listened to every album the past 2 weeks or week and a half.
Which is a lot of music, folks.
It's a lot of music, yeah. Honestly, I would really have even further appreciation because I listened to nothing but Rush for the past 2 weeks and I didn't get bored once.
Mm-hmm.
And which is really a testament to how great the music is and how
it's actually really easy to get carried away.
Yeah, exactly.
Listening to Rush.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, like this album is down here because it's, you don't have Neil, and Neil I think is a really essential part of what makes this band so great.
Sure.
And also it's kind of really, it's nice 70s rock, but it is like 70s rock that's fairly derivative. Like a lot of it, I was like, this is like a Deep Purple record, like almost the whole way through.
Mm-hmm.
There's some, there's nice stuff on here, but it's, it doesn't really sound like Rush a lot of the time. It sounds like Deep Purple and a little bit of Black Sabbath and Zeppelin thrown in.
Yep.
I had fun. It's a fun record for sure, and I think that's why I bumped it up one notch, because I had more fun with this album than I did with Vapor Trails. But it's still, somewhat standard blues rock with great guitar solos from Alex.
Yep. Yeah, I really feel like where this album succeeds is in the songwriting with from Geddy and Alex. And it's held back in the drumming department because their songwriting is really strong. Their playing is really strong. The singing is really strong. Like, yes, for some reason, I had this notion that early 70s Rush was unlistenable in the vocal department. And that was just like a memory thing because I hadn't heard a lot of these records in a while. But I was surprised at how good his singing is. Even, right out the gate, he's got, really good resonance, and it grabs you. Like a song like Finding My Way is a classic for a reason. Yeah. And, they played that, in 76 on All the World's a Stage album. And, they were still playing. I think they even played it throughout the 80s. Like maybe Show of Hands.
They did.
It's in one of the medleys. Yep. But In the Mood is another great memorable song. Of course, Working Man.
Yeah, Working Man's the best one.
A lot of people like Gene Simmons of Kiss would probably say that Rush accomplished all they needed to back then with Working Man, because that's a huge song. That was the one that Donna Halper discovered working on the radio in Cleveland, which is just right up the hill for me these days. But she introduced Rush to America or America to Rush with this song. But I would also point to Here Again as kind of like a midway point. But this is like the anti-Working Man. This is like a bluesier Led Zeppelin 2 version of Working Man. But this is actually my least favorite. I have this at number 19, and the reason for that, and it was hard, but something had to be, and it had to be disqualified for a reason. And I feel personally that even though they revisited this material later on, like live, and even though Working Man is probably, it might be their best known song. I don't know, maybe Tom Sawyer is better known now. Who knows? But despite that, I feel like Rush really begins with Fly By Night. And so for that, like, I almost considered not ranking it. But it wasn't until I started thinking about how they continued playing it and how it's kind of part of the history of the band. Well, okay, it deserves a space. I might agree with you that it's more fun than Vapor Trails. And I think at one point I considered also bumping it up above it, but I still think that there's good work on Vapor Trails. It's just that there's no like great version of it. And if a really great version of that album were to come out, it might bump up a couple of spots in my own ranking.
Yeah, that might change my opinion too. But as it stands, it's on the bottom for me. But it's still like, it's a decent to good album. Like I will attest that Rush does not have a bad album in their catalog.
That's true.
Which is something that very few bands can say. And like this one too is, I would consider this a good album. Rush, yes, the self-title. I would consider it like a good album. It's not like the top of the list, which is, a masterpiece, one of the best things that music has ever seen. This is a good album,
Yeah.
And then to start off with that bass line is really amazing, truthfully.
To me, the biggest flaw here is that this is the only Rush record where they really sound like other bands.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the reason why Working Man became so popular is that Led Zeppelin themselves had moved on from that kind of music by 1974. At that point, they're heading toward Houses of the Holy, which is more of like a progressive album in a way.
Yeah.
So I could see where maybe fans who were feeling left out of the progression of Led Zeppelin would latch on to this. Sort of in the way that Led Zeppelin fans latched on to Greta Van Fleet when they were popular. But because it's like, this reminds me of something that I know and I love. But for me, that doesn't quite do it for me. I like Rush records that reward multiple listens and are full of surprises and uniqueness. And it's the least unique Rush record. And that's why it's my least favorite.
Yeah, it's well said. I feel the same way, except it's second to least.
Yeah, sure. What's your next one?
So I think this is where, my list is, I think, controversial and will potentially be different than a lot of people's lists. And I think this might be the first of the controversial picks, because I know there's people out there who love this record. I used to be one of them many moons ago. In high school, I used to love this record. But now, it's another one of those good albums, but with some flaws, I think. This is number 17, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is 17. 17 is Caresses of Steel, Rush's third album. Sorry for those who adore this record. It's low, but it's still a Rush album, so it's still good.
Yeah.
What to say? When I was in high school, right, I used to love this record. Like, I used to listen to The Necromancer almost on repeat. I loved it to pieces. It's got a really cool cover. I'm sure we can flash a thumbnail. The cover is so cool. It's got a really, like, hazy quality to the artwork. And the music also.
Because of hash oil.
Yeah, exactly. Which I didn't know until you told me that. They were heavy into the hash at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, listening to it today, and the listener that I am today, I find it to be rather clunky. It starts off with Bastille Day, which is a classic Rush song that I still love. Big thumbs up, like, oh, this is killer. And then you get I Think I'm Going Bald, which is like a really weird holdover of the first album in a way. I used to like that song a lot. Now I'm just like, all right, that's something weird. What's this doing here? And then you get to Lakeside Park, which again, it's a song I used to like, but now I really don't like it. I think it's one of their weakest songs, quite honestly.
The band agrees with you.
Yeah, I know Getty agrees for sure. To me, it's just such a weird like song. It doesn't really go anywhere and doesn't really do anything interesting. It just kind of happens, right?
But that's the thing about Lakeside Park. Not to interrupt you, but
yeah.
The opening drum fill of that is like one of the most memorable Rush things ever.
The drum fill is great. Yeah.
It lives in my brain, and it's almost like a guitar riff.
Yeah,
how musical it is.
Yeah, you're right. It's like instant like Neil genius to have a fill like that because it is a melody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people don't view their drum set as a melodic instrument, but it totally is a melodic instrument. You know, when you hit a different surface, that's a different pitch, right? It should be melodic. That's the power of Neil that makes something interesting, even in something that I find not very interesting. But the part of this record that I really like is side 2. The Necromancer is awesome. I love that piece, except for sometimes the narration is really low in the mix and it's hard to hear.
Isn't that side 1?
Is it side 1?
I think Necromancer is side 1. I have this on vinyl, not to brag.
Yeah, that's my bad. I'm sorry, everybody. I only had this on CD, and so in my brain I lumped the two epic pieces together.
Oh,
that's probably why I thought it was side 2. But Necromancer is still side 1. Yeah, I love it. The narration is kind of inaudible, but man, the music is cooking. Alex plays some amazing guitar solos on this, and the band is just hot. I wish like they would play that live. I don't know if they've ever played the Necromancer live, to be honest.
They did on the Down the Tubes tour. I'm pretty certain they did.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
The Down the Tubes tour is the unofficial name of the Caressive Steel tour, because if you follow the band's history at this time, so it's interesting, but basically they had a decent amount of success with the first Rush album, and people really liked it. Audiences really responded to it. It was played on the radio. With Fly By Night, it was kind of like, okay, this is one more. Like, this is now we're opening for Kiss and other kind of up and coming bands at that time. But this was the first time where, commercially speaking, they took a step backwards, and it looked like they were on their downward spiral, to borrow a Trent Reznor-ism. So they named the tour the Down the Tubes tour because they were playing smaller venues. They were, opening for people who were also on their way out, in terms of their place in the music business. And as it stands, I think I think the band would agree with me that this album is a very important, part of their discography, because, and you also got to remember that, like, at the time, the management was looking at Neil and pointing a finger at Neil and saying, you are a bad influence on these boys. You are making this weird progressive rock music. You guys are supposed to be straight ahead. And, it leads to Neil storming out on their management at one point, at a party, and saying that, my art cannot be compromised. There is no room for compromise in art. And there's something to be said for the fact that, yeah, it's a failure, but it's a failure on their own terms.
Totally.
And they believed in it. And I'd say they learned from it, because the next record was a little bit more immediate. As for myself, I have this in the same position that you do. It's like third from the bottom. And my feelings are that I think Bastille Day is a classic. It's probably the classic of this album.
Yeah.
I Think I'm Going Bald. It doesn't fit.
No, it doesn't fit at all.
It would fit better with like Fly By Night or even the first album. But there's a couple of things I do like about it. And number one, I like that it's a folkloric song. This is about Alex being obsessed with his hair falling out and gaining weight. And so he's rubbing all of these mysterious products into his hair to try to save it. And you look at pictures of Alex in those days, I'm going to throw one up here, and he's got, a luscious head of hair. But it was just something he was really in his head about, like I'm going to lose my hair. I'm going to be overweight. So they write a song about that, a folkloric song, just to kind of entertain themselves. It won't be the last time they write a song about Alex, but I also like the lyric in this that Neil kind of slides in, because it's kind of like almost like CSNY, like I almost cut my hair kind of song, lyrically speaking. but then when you get to the last, I guess, verse when he says, "I'll go gray my way," and I feel that encapsulates Rush.
That's
We're
a
going to
good
do
point.
this on our own terms.
Yeah.
Even aging, we'll age on our own terms.
They certainly did, I think.
And they
continue
did
to do so. Yeah.
Yeah, so I like it. I like it for those two things. A song like Lakeside Park, I actually do really enjoy. I disagree with you in the band. I like the opening riff, the drum riff, and I kind of like the feel of it. I like some of the guitar tones that Alex used on it. You definitely do get the sense that they were smoking a little bit too much pot, as the band were saying, and maybe they were getting a little bit lost, like they were getting a little bit distracted. But the Necromancer is pretty tight as far as composition goes. I hear you on the narration being low in the mix. I believe that's Neil.
I think it's
doing
Neil,
that narration. And this is, of course, inspired by the band's obsession with J.R.R. Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings. The Necromancer is, of course, Tolkien's name for Sauron.
Yeah, it's early. It's when Sauron was in hiding.
Right, exactly. Which, if you've seen the Hobbit films, that's been worked back into the films, much to my annoyance. But
we can talk about that another day too.
We can talk about that another day. But
yes.
To me, the Necromancer is almost like Bytorn the Snow Dog, but without the humor.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit repetitive, but it's also, to me, like they're furthering that progressive direction. And maybe they got a little bit lost, and I think Lamneth is maybe the most emblematic of that getting lost in the weeds issue. And you didn't talk much about side 2, but for me, Fountain of Lamneth is like a solid first 10 minutes, and then it stops hanging together as a composition, and it just starts feeling like different songs put together, and they some of them don't even feel like they belong on the same album to me. But I really dig the Didax and Narpitz section.
I love that. Yeah, that drum solo is amazing. The crazy tom work is like, honestly, it's one of my favorite Neil moments on record.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the way it's produced is so cool. Like, it's almost like as he's like hitting the toms down the register, it's like phasing in and out. It's so cool.
And some heavy use of compression.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is kind of experimental, but it's kind of ahead of the curve a little bit.
Yeah, it is, sure.
To compress the drums that much, like that sort of thing wouldn't become popular until like the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's definitely ahead of its time. And I want to point out something you pointed out to me from Geddy Lee's book, that they were listening to a lot of Van de Graaff Generator, specifically in particular Pawn Hearts, and I can hear it so much in this piece. To now, it reminds me of the structure of the Plague of Lighthouse Keepers. It even has like that piece has some spaces in it, and so does Lamneth. I found that fascinating. Like the Didax and Narpitz is almost like it's totally not like this, but it's like their answer to that one really high climax in Lighthouse Keepers. I can't remember.
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's the where it gets really, really crazy.
Yep. There's a moment where they actually overdub themselves.
Yes.
Playing on top of them, and I'm talking about Van de Graaff Generator.
Yeah.
They overdub themselves like 10 times, and it's just
that's
chaos.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't want to be one within the water.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I totally get that, and that's something that I never knew. I saw Van de Graaff Generator the same year I saw Rush for the first time, and I never would have made that connection that Geddy loved them so much. But he mentions Van de Graaff Generator like they are gods to him. He must mention them like 6 times in his book, and I just didn't expect that. Camel too. That was another one. Is like,
yeah,
they did Camel. That's neat. Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to mention, you were talking about how much you love the cover art, and maybe I'll take some photos of the record and put it up. Put it up on Still Store, Cambot. But this is Hugh Syme. This is his first work with the band, and he would continue to do the band's artwork up through Clockwork Angels, which is absolutely incredible.
It is incredible.
It's like if Roger Dean had done every Yes album, and they were all different, like in terms of design work, like that. Just,
yeah, it's mind blowing to me. Also, I think the only other thing I wanted to mention about Caress of Steel is that the back, like you said, the back like 8 or 9 minutes of Lambeth is pretty forgettable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just unfocused, and they would get a lot better at writing the longer songs after this record. Like you said, I think they like made this record, and then they learned a lot from it, and then they came back swinging with the next one, which we'll talk about
get to
later on. Yeah,
it's much higher on both of our lists, and
absolutely,
and so it should be. But I wanted to mention that No One at the Bridge is probably my favorite section of this. Like the Good Axe and Armpits into No One at the Bridge, but Panacea is a really nice piece, and it kind of, to me, it reminds me of Halo Effect a little bit. If that's the one I'm thinking of, it kind of reminds me of Halo Effect from
Clockwork Angels, right?
Clockwork Angels.
Yep.
And the final song, The Fountain, is actually pretty nice. It's a pretty nice little melody, and it reappears. It's at the front of the composition, and it's at the end. So it's not necessarily that it's got bad music in it. It's just that it doesn't fit together for me. It feels too arbitrarily stitched. And yeah, they'll get better at that.
So again, with the artwork is the same person. This album and the previous album's artwork is, the same person is wild to me also. At number 16, I have Test for Echo.
Mm-hmm.
Apologies for the horrible glare. But yeah, Test for Echo is my number 16. I kind of really like this artwork. It's so, in a way, weird, right? Because it's like this like Easter Island-esque rock formation, and then there's the three guys are climbing it, but it looks like it's digital, but it kind of isn't. I can't really tell.
Yeah,
it's got that 90s feel to it.
It's a digital illustration, by the way.
It is a digital illustration.
Yes.
It's neato. It's got that like late 90s look, and look in the artwork. Here it is again.
Mm-hmm.
It has a real, I don't know, it's got that feel to it. It looks really nice, but it's got that late 90s feel to it, but it doesn't feel cheesy. It's really cool art.
And then you kind of have the signals kind of, that's coming back, that motif.
Yeah, it's receiving the signals.
And the three satellite dishes, again, the trio.
Yep.
That's a motif.
It's got all the motifs. It's great. This album surprised me also with its music. I always used to consider this one towards the bottom too, and it kind of still is, but I think it's stronger than its reputation. A lot of people don't like this record, from what I understand. I think it's a lot better than its reputation. I really like the sound of this album too. It's very muscular,
and
it's got a lot of heft and depth to the mix, which
that's Peter Collins. I think that's his production. Yep.
Yeah, it's great. I think it serves the material really well. It has like one of the best 1-2 punches in the catalog with Test for Echo and Driven. I just love both of those songs. They kick major butt, especially Geddy Lee's bass moments in Driven. I mean, forget it. That's classic Rush for me all the way. I really also like Half the World. That's a very strong song with some really important lyrics. It's got a lot of surprises. Like the Color of Right has some moments to it. Time and Motion is a really kick-ass song.
Oh yeah.
That sounds like classic Rush to me. It's almost like a more modern take on something from like Hold Your Fire, right? It has the similar kind of writing to me. I also think the drumming on this record is really tremendous.
Yes.
Like I said a little bit about Vapor Trails, Neil is trying some new stuff. He was taking lessons with jazz drummers at this point, and you can
Freddie
tell.
Gruber.
Yeah, with Freddie Gruber. Right? Yeah.
The Yoda of the drums.
Yes. And he really invented how he plays the drums, and you can hear it in a lot of these drum parts.
Well, specifically, he said Freddie taught him how to play under the beat.
Yes.
He's always on top of the beat, but Freddie taught him how to play under the beat. And he said that they were listening to playbacks, the three guys, and they were like, well, we don't hear any difference in your drumming. But it wasn't until the other two guys had to try to play to it. This has shifted a little bit. Something's a little different. But I do get the sense that Neil, what it really gave him was the option to go for either feel, because sometimes he could still play the original stuff the way that it originally was, like on tour and stuff, but it kind of gave him the option of a different kind of feel.
This album also has the song Virtuality, which is a really strong one, and I think points to the material to follow it. Even though Rush would disband for a few years after this album, I think Virtuality kind of looks to the future and the way that they wrote songs in the future, which I think is really cool to hear on this album. It's a surprise for me. And it also has another one of the best Rush songs, and that's Resist. Mm-hmm. Resist is an extremely moving song, especially to today's age.
Yes.
And it only gets better as an acoustic version too.
Yep. I agree with that. I was actually kind of impressed by the original version because I was so used to hearing the acoustic version. And I like Neil's drum part on this. And there's like some light and dark moments to it. And it almost puts me in the mind of a like a Jethro Tull song, because it's got like a folky lift.
Yeah, totally. It's got a unique feel for the band, and I think that's really awesome. Like nothing really else kind of sounds like this in their discography.
Yeah, I agree. Now, my ranking, I placed this at the exact same spot you did.
Oh my gosh.
It's number 16 for me, which is a little scary. But see, when I was a kid, I got this for my birthday, and I didn't like the whole record back then. And so there were like a handful of songs that I just drilled into my head over and over again. Because when I was young, I didn't necessarily play the whole disc from front to back. I would just pick out my favorite songs and then move on. But I played Test for Echo a lot. I played Driven a lot, Half the World, Time and Motion. But Totem, that was a song that I just loved when I was a kid. Virtuality too. I really loved that one. And I never quite understood why people hate that song so much. Like they always say like it's going to be out of date, and I'm waiting for it. When's it out of date? Like people still meet on the internet, and they still have avatars on the internet. There are parts of themselves that they hide. There are parts of themselves that they emphasize on the internet because they have that safety. I think he was ahead of the curve a little bit with Virtuality.
That's a really great lyric.
It is.
It's really great.
And I love the whole net boy, net girl thing. Like it almost kind of reminds me of Presto, boys and girls together. Let's paint the mirror black. But that's the point I was going to make, is that in the Martin Popoff book, The Contents Under Pressure, he points out that this album is like a merger of the two Rupert Hine produced albums, which would be Presto and Roll the Bones, with Counterparts, which is a Peter Collins production. And it's much heavier and muscular and kind of grungy. But this is like an attempt to mix those worlds of kind of more pop songwriting with heavier stuff. And when it works, man, this album is great. And I kind of wish that I had a few more plays of it. These days, I wish I'd listened to it a little bit more, because it might be higher on my list a little bit.
I would agree with you, actually.
If I spend a little more time with it, I think it might be. But Driven, I think, is such an interesting song rhythmically. There's so many just like little jazzy moments in it. And this is, again, like picking up the theme of the open road, something that was explored with Red Barchetta back on Moving Pictures, and will be explored again with Ghost Rider on Vapor Trails. I love Half the World lyrically. Like that's a song that feels like it could have been written right now. I love it lyrically. There's something melodically about it that just doesn't quite connect. The Color of Right is a song that I don't remember much about at all.
It's fairly forgettable.
Yeah, but man, Time and Motion, that is like the Smashing Pumpkins but Rushified. It's like a proggier Smashing Pumpkins, and I adore that song. Dog Years is another one that's like a real miss for me.
Dog Years is one of my least favorite Rush songs. I think the lyric, it's like way too on the nose, like around the snout,
right?
I should say.
Well, Neil wrote it when he hung over.
Neil's lyrics are like almost always really eloquent and alliterative, but I don't know. These are way too nail on the head, and the song isn't that interesting. It's like a big miss, unfortunately, for me. Uh-oh. Hello?
Uh-oh. Okay, well, we'll just tell the folks at home in case we just magically switch places and there's nothing that I can do about it in editing that you have a rainstorm or something coming through, so your connection is hit or miss. But we're just gonna keep going, and we were talking about Test for Echo.
Yes.
And specifically why Dog Years is so disappointing. You know, if you ever see the show Cheers, you know, when he says it's a dog eat dog world and I'm wearing milk-bone underpants. Yeah. I feel like it was that kind of sentiment, and somewhere in Neil's Hangover he kind of lost touch with the metaphor, and it just, like you said, it was too on the dog nose.
Yeah. And it just, I don't know, it just doesn't work as a song for me, or like it doesn't work well.
Yeah. About the only thing I like is the riff. The riff is cool.
It is cool. That song, and I think parts of the last couple, or the last two rather, are just kind of somewhat forgettable, honestly. Mm-hmm. Like I think that's the weak part of this album and why it's lower than most of the other ones. Everything else about it's got a lot good going for it. It's just that stuff is somewhat forgettable. Like Limbo is an instrumental, which is cool, and it's got some moments to it, but I can't really remember it. And the same with Carve Away the Stone. I could not sing you that song, unfortunately. I just don't remember how it goes.
Limbo is that one should please fans of King Crimson, because it's got a little moment that's like, you know, where Geddy's playing some really funky bass that kind of sounds like Tony Levin, and Neil's kind of got like a gamelan groove going on, and it sounds like maybe Alex like double tracked his guitar. And has like some interlocking stuff going on, but that brought a smile to my face. That song honestly comes across, and a lot of their instrumentals at times do, like it's just unused bits. Like, oh, let's just throw all these unused ideas together and see what happens. And sometimes it really works.
Yes.
This is, like you said, it's kind of forgettable. It's not the most memorable song.
I appreciate this album too for its somewhat brevity. Like this is like the beginning of the super long album era for everybody, right, in the late 90s, and Rush will fall victim to that later, but right now they still like made this short enough. Like it's not like a maximize the disc space album. It's
right.
It's
like
got
50 minutes.
Yeah, it's like 50 minutes, which is a nice album length for a CD.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate them for that.
Yeah,
it makes the record better.
It does, and when we're complaining about the length of the albums, there's a certain part of me that, since Rush is done and there's not going to be any more Rush, it's like, well, I'm not going to complain about anything. I'm glad to have whatever we have. And
yeah, that's a good point.
Obviously, they weren't intended to be listened to, binged like we have been. Like you were supposed to. Like if you think about it, every year they might release an album that's 32 to 35 minutes long in the 70s and 80s. And then from like 97 on, they were releasing albums every 5 years or so, and they were like twice the length. So it kind of, if you think about it that way, it's sort of like if Moving Pictures and Permanent Waves were the same record. But at the same time, those albums individually are stronger than these longer.
Yeah, because they were made at the same time. Like all the material's written in the same stretch of time, I guess. I know you got a good point too, because it is Rush material after all, and we're blessed to have any of it. And these are also like albums. We're not hearing these for the first time either. Yeah. Right. These are all albums that we're like at least fairly familiar with, to like we've been listening to religiously since we were like 11 or 15 or something.
Yeah. In the case of Test for Echo, I've been hearing it for 30 years. So,
wow.
I mean, I got it when it first came out, so
there you go. 30 years later, huh?
Yeah.